Well, here we go. Episode 1, the Agentic Self podcast. Why am I here? That is the question. I am always looking to do new things. I like to try new things. I like novelty. I learned in my brain coaching certification last year. I completed it this year, but I started it last year. That novelty is one of those parts that humans need for their brain to grow. So I guess my brain's growing a lot because I'm always interested in new experiences. I also know the power of story. I believe that story is the only thing that's ever changed the world. And story is just a vibration. It is a sound vibration that comes in and we interpret it, make meaning from it. And meaning making is what my work is all about. When we hear story from others, we hear how they make meaning in their lives and how they apply that meaning towards action. That's motivating. That's inspiring. I can't tell you how inspired I am by others hearing their stories, what it took for them to overcome challenges in their lives, whether it be their own personal, physical, mental, spiritual challenges that they face, or whether it's challenges in relationships with their husband, their wife, their workplaces. That is another area of interest of mine, of course, given my work as a consultant for leaders in workplaces to create environments of safety and security as best that we can so that people can thrive and focus on why they're there and what the work is that needs to be done in the ways that is going to be the most productive, the most powerful, the most prosperous. We all desire prosperity. We all desire safety. And so creating environments where we can realize that is going to optimize the outcomes. So to workplaces, within ourselves, within our communities, how are we showing up? How are we hiding? What more information might we need to know in order to make the best, most mindful next step? Hi, my name is Patricia Ockney, and I am the host of the Agentic Self podcast. Like I said in episode 0, I'm not really sure what this is going to look like, and it's a creative personal project that will also align with the work I'm doing as a consultant, a private practice clinical specialist, and fellow human. I like to not have a number of labels and identities. This is who I am. We'll talk more about that throughout the Agentic Self podcast, these ideas that we attach to, and then our behaviors need to align with those attachments, which can become very limiting. My company is called Nova Salutum Inc., which means new health for ourselves, new health in our relationships and our workplaces. And I very much believe in education. We become healthier through learning. How do we learn? Through reading, through listening, through acting, through interpreting the world around us, and it's very unique. It's actually, well, the logo for my company is a fingerprint, and that is simply to inspire people when they see it that this means uniqueness. You know, each individual is unique, each organization, each family. We are all unique and we have gifts and we have struggles, we have challenges, we have unique resources available to each of us. And so the goal of my work, the goal of my personal mission while I'm here is how can I use the resources that I have to make the most positive impact while I'm here. And so when people come into my practice, that's where we start is what is the meaning? What's the impact? And meaning making is different based on your genetics, based on where you grew up, based on what trauma you've survived. Everything is filtered through a lens of our awareness. So the agentic self, that authentic self that we want to take action towards those meaningful things in our lives. That's what my work is really about is getting to what is the meaning, what is the purpose, where are we trying to go? And part of that is being still, which is really difficult to convince organizations or individuals or couples that perhaps we can actually move forward and have more of a positive impact on our mission if we could slow down a little bit. If we could be more still, if we could be more in presence, in the present moment, to call ourselves in, to ask, what do I need right now? What story? And people can get upset with me or confused when I talk about the story you're making up because, well, I don't make up stories. Well, yes, you do. Your brain is constantly making meaning based on filtering in the information. And then we have a running story of what's happening. So if we're not tuned into the story we're making up, we could be at risk of being on autopilot and believing everything that our brain is telling us. And that's kind of dangerous. We don't want to believe everything our brain is telling us because this is a supercomputer that is creating a lot of stories. And one of the things that keeps me in business is confabulations, actually. Confabulations being the stories we tell ourselves honestly that might not actually be true. Because the brain, you see, likes to fill in bits of information that are missing. So our brain will see something and quickly make up a story about what's happening in order to keep ourselves safe, keep ourselves protected, keep security. Certainty is a really common one. We want to know for sure that this is dangerous or this is good or that's bad or I don't want to be associated with that because the herd or the sheep have said no, that's not the way we're going. And if you've ever worked around animals, you would know when one gets something in their head, fear, for example, and spooks, the rest, it's like a contagion. The rest may follow as well. So it's very important that we remember that we are pack. We are herd animals. And so we need to be careful that we are thinking like a herd, but also like individuals that make up the herd. I wish to make impact and I want to help people. I want to do good, come up with some value to offer listeners. Share some of the tools I've learned, the stories that may inspire or maybe a cautionary tale to you or your family and yeah, be curious, harvest the gold if there is any. There might be a lot of other matter that that is produced on this podcast. And there could be some gold nuggets here because I know I've harvested a lot of gold nuggets from others. So I hope to share some of those here. And when I have some guests on the podcast, no doubt there will be lots of gold to be shared there. And hopefully some laughs Oh, I don't want this to be doom and gloom. Like, I am so consumed by my work. I am so consumed with making an impact and having value, and I sometimes get a little lost and forget about play, and I forget about fun, and I forget about humor sometimes. And okay, so before I recorded so this is episode 1, yes, episode 1. Episode 0 was like 4 or 5 minutes, and it was, "Hi, I don't know what this is, but I'm gonna do a podcast, and I don't know what it's about, but hey, listen, follow, and like," right? So that's the beginning, and I still don't 100% know what my podcast is, but I know it's for me. That's where I'm trying to get to, is to let you guys know this isn't for you. It is actually for me to challenge myself to create something that is going to last, that when I am gone, my kids will have this. There'll be great guests sharing stories to inspire and educate and take what, you know, means something to you and use it. That's my wish, that is my hope. I want it to be funny, I want it to be inspiring, I want the sound quality to be good, I want it to not be boring, I want it to have audio and video. I wanted to just say that where my interest started with human behavior was actually on the farm with animal behavior. Why, when a new animal was brought onto the farm, did the other animals bully this new animal? Why, when a new young heifer comes into the herd, do the old cows beat her up? Why do they bully her? Why is she the last one to eat, for example? Very curious about nature growing up on the farm. The current version of myself is, rooted in farming, in the cultivation slowly of things to get to that end result. Paying attention to the little ways that we can augment in order to increase that output that we need with very little sometimes. That was all started on the farm, using what you had with what you knew and making the best of it. And I think those lessons certainly will be talked about throughout the podcast because I'm always going back to the farm. My dad is actively seeking connection, ways to help make things better, ways he can, yeah, lend a helping hand. And so I am very similar in that way. I like to make connections with people. I like to learn about other people, why they do what they're doing or not doing. And so, yeah, the connection I wanted to talk about today, since Callum gave me the great idea to talk about connection, is connection to yourself. That's where everything stems from, is the connection with yourself. Dramatic pause. What's consuming people is disconnection. Disconnection is what is selling everything in our consumeristic cohort of the human species, where, we're in the compare and despair cycle, not enough cycle, more, 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 which is tied again back to fear, which is one of the reasons I'm doing this podcast, is because I don't want to be afraid. I don't want to be afraid to speak, to comment on what I'm noticing, to share what I've learned. I just don't wanna be afraid, and the podcast is a way that I can practice in public. I wanna create a podcast that will live on and be about our common humanity, be about the stories that bring us together and connect us as an antidote to disconnection, because there is so much disconnection. And so going back to this idea of everything starts with the self, how can we examine ways we may be disconnected from our own selves? What does that look like? What does that sound like? What does that even feel like? What does it feel like to be connected? I suppose we need to know what it feels like to be connected to know what it feels like to be disconnected. Mhm. Maybe? So, connection is the goal. Disconnection is something we need to get familiar with. What does it actually look like? Disconnection. And I often will talk about in my work about this cohort being one of the most disconnected that ever existed. Because of technology advancements, we've had so much technology advancements that everything is competing for our attention. This is the attention economy. Look over here, look over here, look over there. Buy this, buy that. Be this, be that. Don't be this, don't be that. Oh my goodness, it is overwhelming. And, I do wonder what we're going to look like in the future, humans, when we are missing a lot of the point now. What's it going to be like in the future? Okay, that's doom and gloom. I don't want to be doom and gloom. I want to be positive. That's what I want to be. So, growing up on the farm really got me interested in why animals do what they do and being curious about that. So, studying psychology was a natural fit for me to answer some of those questions that I had. I grew up in a community where people helped one another, and I also wanted to be a helper. So, after a year of university and the price of university, and me not being 100% sure what I wanted to be when I grew up, I decided to take a year and see a little bit of the world and figure out what I wanted to be. I decided to go on a 6-month agricultural exchange program where I milked cows in New Zealand. And on that trip, I met my husband, Henry. Henry is from a beef and sheep farm in Scotland. Henry was on 6 months to New Zealand, 6 months to Manitoba, and I was only 6 months New Zealand. And so we were getting closer to the end of the 6 months, and he was off to Manitoba. And well, I guess, that was going to be the end of our time together. But neither of us really wanted it to be the end of our time together. So I flew home to Nova Scotia, and he flew to Manitoba where he was going to be working on a grain farm. And I was just going to miss that Scottish farmer a little too much. So I decided that I would also join him in Manitoba. So when I flew home, I said hi to my parents, grabbed my Toyota Tercel, packed it full. I looked at some job ads before I went out and, yeah, drove 46 hours out west to Manitoba chasing this Scottish farmer who was working out there, who I'd met in New Zealand, and ended up working on a grain farm, a 5,000-acre grain farm with an Italian farmer who farmed the land for 6 months and then went back to Italy and farmed there for 6 months. So I got a job on his farm and I did his combining and I did his harrowing. I did hauling grain, did all the jobs that were needing to be done. And he had a house on the farm as well. So I had accommodation and employment. So it worked out pretty good. And Henry ended up leaving his work at that exchange. It wasn't a great situation. So he ended up leaving the program and working on the grain farm that I was on. And we worked there for 6 months and that was good times. That was really good times. And then we did a little bit of traveling, drove back to Nova Scotia. Henry got to meet my parents. And we worked for a while on the farm and went to Scotland, saved up money to travel again. I worked with his dad and did labor and saved up, and Henry worked a number of jobs as well. And then we went to Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia, went to but back to New Zealand for a bit and also to Australia for a year and settled down in Nova Scotia. We felt it would be a better quality of life. The weather's better as well. So we are here. So yeah, Henry and I met in New Zealand. I mean, that was over 30 years ago now. And we settled here. I went back to school. So after we came back to Nova Scotia, I returned to my studies. And after all of that, I ended up doing psychology after all. So I was, on the right track. I was in the right genre for where I wanted to go in the helping profession and understanding the science of why we do what we do. I was on the right track and continued on that track. Went to Mount Allison and got a degree in psychology, and I worked as well as studied, and then I started having babies. So was having the babies, working, studying, got another degree in social work, went to the University of Victoria and then did my master's at Dell. Henry ran my family's small uh, golf course. We have a small par 3 golf course that my grandparents had started as a centennial project, and that's what brought us back. My dad had recommended or offered if Henry wanted to come back and manage the golf course. We were living in Scotland at the time, that we could come back and he would do that. So that's what we did. He came back and managed the golf course and I finished my studies. So fast forward, we don't need to hear my life story. I just wanted to kind of give a background of where I have been. When we moved back to Nova Scotia, we built our home, and after a number of years of my husband running the golf course, he decided to retrain. So we ended up selling our house and my husband went back to school. That's what brought us down to the Lawrencetown area. I wanted to have a lifestyle for the kids where they could be outdoors all year round and have an activity we could do together. And that ended up being surfing. I had tried surfing in Bali. I tried surfing in Hawaii. I tried surfing in a number of different places, but you don't just try surfing. You have to commit to it and decide that it's going to be a skill set you're going to to learn. I thought that would be a great activity for my 3 children to grow up doing in Nova Scotia. So Lawrencetown Beach area is where we bought a small piece of land and we built a home here. My vision for my family was closeness and connection. I had the 3 children close together for that reason. I wanted the kids to kind of grow up together, to be friends, to be close, and I know you can't engineer relationships like that, but you can certainly create conditions where connection can happen. And so, fast forward to Finley is, he'll be 18 this year. Isla's turning 19, Callum's 20. So I did successfully have them close together. They are close siblings, which is great. And they all surf, so I guess, in a way that warms my heart that mission accomplished, I guess. And and here we are in Lawrencetown. We it's rare that we're all in the water together at the same time. It's rare that we get to surf together because, life now. But when they were little and when I had some control, we would be together. So surfing is awesome. Really, I love time in the water. I love being on the water. We're here on Lawrencetown Lake. And it's just beautiful. It's a beautiful area. Nova Scotia is a beautiful place to live. And an outdoor lifestyle is certainly, was my dream. Growing up on a farm, being outside, having space was awesome. And I wanted to be able to give some space to my kids, and the ocean sure does that. I thought I would look through some of the I spoke earlier about perfectionism. One of the reasons I'm doing this podcast is to inoculate my own perfectionism. So to show up, to record, to speak, to get it wrong, to maybe get some things right, to share story, to elevate other people and not be afraid. Fear is something that I'm always battling, and it's important to me to not let fear be the driver of hiding and not putting myself out there to have fun, to play, to create. And creativity is something that I'm learning is more and more essential for our well-being. And so today, episode 1, I really wanted to introduce myself, talk a little bit about what's brought me here, and I think I've done that to some extent. Grew up in the farm, studied psychology, got trained, work in private practice now. I do coaching, consulting, clinical work, mostly with military, also private practice, just regular folks, and organizations, helping organizations to create cultures that people thrive in. Prevention is a key uh, way of practicing for me. It's about prevention. It's about early intervention. What's that quote? I'm going to butcher it. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I don't know if that's right, but this is an example of me not knowing the saying and me butchering it and being okay with it because it doesn't have to be perfect. Curiosity drives a lot of the work that I do. So meeting people, sharing story on this podcast is all about feeding my desire for curiosity, also my desire for connection, because everything I do is driven by connection with myself. How can I take care of myself better? Understand myself better so that I may have a positive impact on the world, on my family, on my kids. That's my first world is my family. Everything else comes after that. If we don't take care of ourselves, then we can't do the other things. So as much as our culture, I believe, has kind of said it's selfish to take care of yourself, I think the opposite. I think We do need to take care of self enough so that we can, play, have fun, enjoy ourselves while we're here, and maybe leave things better than when we arrived. I don't know if we ever get to see the proof of that. Episode 1, I've told you a bit about me, and now I'm just kind of looking here because I did take some notes. I must have 50 different notes, just like little articles I've written about what I want to talk about, what I want the mission of the podcast. And I am going to just go through this one I just opened up to see if there's things I wanted to mention on today's episode. And I just want to share with you like this perfectionism in me. I've written and written and written and was thinking I would follow a script, but I don't like following a script. I want to share what comes up, but having a few key points I think is really important. And I'm just going to read this because it's just kind of funny. I'm Patricia Ockney, performance coach, clinical therapist, leadership strategist, and lifelong student of the human operating system. That is something I do want to talk about is the operating system. Taking notes because I'll forget. So operator and observer, those are kind of the language I use when I'm working with people because we need to separate a little bit from our doing self, our going self, our automatic self, the self that is just kind of getting through the day, doing all the stuff we need to do. There's that self, which I would say we're primarily operating in the operator mode. And then I'd like to suggest, if I may, that there's also the observer. So that is the part of you that's bearing witness to what the operator is doing. So our operator is that central nervous system, the brain, the spinal cord, all of the nerves, everything that is like sensing and filtering all of the information that's coming in, right? That nervous system, this operator here, and then the observer of that. So there is moments when we can actually pause and take a breath and notice that we're actually not alone in here. Dun, dun, dun. Does that sound scary? We're not alone in here. We're not. There's a part of you that's observing what's going on, right? We have the observer and the operator. It's sort of a simple way of describing, the autopilot versus being in presence. So autopilot is going and doing our thing every day, our work, cooking, cleaning, all of the things versus the observer who's the presence, the awareness of what is going on. To be present in our mind, present in our bodies, present with the people that we're with. We're not on our phones. We're not distracted. We're not thinking about what's the next thing I'm going to say. We're not building our argument in our head when somebody's talking. We're actually present in our bodies, in the moment, in the here and now. That is what drives me every day. To be in connection with other people, to hold a mirror so they may see the ways that they shine and maybe they can see the ways they can shine even brighter, or maybe they can discover other pathways that they didn't know were there because we all have these blinders on. We all have blinders on, and and when we're in relationship and in connection with others, that can open up those blinders to be able to see other things. And it's so powerful. But I would say at the same time, in order to be in connection with others, to be able to feel that we can open up those blinders or take them off, we must first be in connection with ourselves. You know, connection to the self, the authentic self, the self that has agency. The self that is fully aware when you're in fear, when you're in avoidance, or when you're in love and you're in connection. It is from that place that all else comes. So if we're unable to connect with our own fears and our own love within our own minds, within our own hearts, within our own bodies, we're really going to struggle to connect with others, whether it be in the workplace, in relationships. And so, at the core of my work, at the absolute core, it is how connected are you to you? And so for me to be able to do that work, I need to be in connection with myself. I need to know what I am avoiding or what I'm leaning into and why. Critical thinking is critical. That's why it's called critical thinking. And how can we understand how our system works, our central nervous system, in order to, what I like to say, calibrate it in order to get the outputs that we desire the most in the most efficient way possible. Because make no mistake, this is a system. The central nervous system, it's a system. I think in systems. I am a system. How could I not think in systems? This system is connected to gravity. This system is connected in relationship to others. It's connected to everything around. There is no separation. So understanding how systems work, understanding how systems work is critical to our relationships with others. I learned about systems on the farm. That is where the birth of my curiosity happened. Because the farm is a system. It is part of nature. It is part of the seasons like we are. And so I studied the central nervous system. I studied our societal systems that create these systems. I'm curious about them. I want to understand why we're doing it this way, why we're not doing it this way, why we're not attending to these needs, but we're attending to these needs. Also, how our brains, this supercomputer, is operating. Are we observing the operator? That's always my question. For myself first, and then others. Especially if you're in a position of power. And the Agentic Self podcast is about power, essentially. It's about agency within. It's tapping into and connecting to the agency that is within us. And in a world of disconnection, right? We've got a lot of ways we're trying to disconnect people from themselves in order to get them to buy things, to go places and do certain things, right? To spend money. We push disconnection for that purpose. So if we aren't able to identify disconnection, then we really will struggle to identify what real connection looks like. And it always begins here. It always begins within ourselves. It's not out there. Neither is happiness, neither is success, neither is contentment. It's not out there in things. It's what we're experiencing within our own system. And like I said earlier, this system is connected to out there. So we need to understand relationally how we've come to be. And, if we're not happy with the way we are, mind, body, spirit, science says we can change, that we can make new connections. What they don't tell you is that it's really, really hard. It's really hard to rewire. I often liken it to ruts in a field because I always go back to farming analogies. The tractor going in the field and in the same place every time, it's really well worn. And thoughts are like that. Behaviors are like that. Patterns. We could even take our hand off the steering wheel of the tractor and it's still going to kind of bump around in those tracks. We don't even have to steer. And we can choose that. We can choose that autopilot. We can choose that automatic, that operator mode, or we can look to integrate operator and observer, bringing the two together. Operator, observer. Okay, what am I doing? Noticing it. What do I need right now? What's the emotion I'm feeling? Oh, I'm comparing. I'm despairing because I'm comparing. Or maybe I'm curious and open minded. Maybe I'm approaching things with love and curiosity and abundance. Or maybe I'm approaching things with fear and scarcity and not enough. Do I believe that? Do I believe there's not enough? Do I believe I'm not enough? Do I believe that fear is real? Should I be making decisions based on something I'm making up? Something I think somebody else might think in their mind, "Oh, I better not do that because what if?" Being governed by fear is something that keeps me in business. And I do work myself out of a job. I tell my people that. I'm always trying to work myself out of a job. I like to provide the tools, provide the education, and then it's up to you to practice, just like it's up to me to practice. So, how can we learn more about the operator and the observer within us in order to make more wise minded decisions in our lives, in our workplaces, in our homes, in our communities? Because at the end of the day, if we can choose love for ourselves, connection for ourselves, it's going to reduce violence out there. It's going to reduce scarcity out there. It's going to create more opportunity for connection, which is why I do what I do, to increase connection. And I've been avoiding doing this number 1 podcast, episode 1. I've been avoiding it because of perfectionism, because, "Oh, I wanted a camera here, and I wanted a camera here, and I wanted to make sure everything was in line and flowed, from episode 1 to episode 500 or 5." I have no idea how many I'm gonna do. But wanting to have that connection, perfection, flow, want it to be a certain way, put the blinders on, which has kind of held me back a little bit, the perfectionism. So I mentioned to my oldest before coming down here to do this recording today, "Oh, I'm going to go down and record the first episode. What do you think I should talk about?" Because I never plan. I don't like to plan it. And I should. I know. I'll probably plan more, but he thought for a minute and then he said connection. And of course, my heart just sang, right? I was so excited that my kid said the topic should be connection. And he's right because he knows me. Connection is what drives what I do. So, connection to the self, the authentic self that has agency Agency and action together. We have agency. We have to remember that. Agency is the opposite of apathy, I think. I don't know. Maybe it's not, but in a world full of apathy, let's have agency. Let's decide that we're going to make a difference within ourselves, and that will spill out and spread to the rest of the world, right? This podcast will be about story, sharing story of where we've overcome challenges, overcome negative thinking or those confabulations, those lies told honestly to ourselves that I can't do that, that's not me, and staying within those ruts, those well-worn tractor lines. This podcast will be about inspiring ourselves to show up for ourselves differently every day. In a world of self abandonment, what does it look like when we don't abandon? What does it look like when we take care of our mind, take care of our body, take care of our soul, and we integrate the three together: mind, body, soul, mind, body, spirit? The spirit being our meaning, our purpose, what drives us every day to show up in love versus fear. I will be simplifying a lot of things in this podcast, and I will be bringing things back down to love or fear. What's the choice here? Because we have choice when we're in present moment, when we're in presence, when we're here in the body, when we're not disconnected. You know, Sometimes we just stay in the executive functioning area of the brain up here. We'd rather think about things versus feeling them and knowing, oh, that doesn't feel good. Or knowing, my heart's racing right now because I didn't like something my boss said or my colleague said. But I'm going to ignore that. I'm just going to push that away and do the thing. And working in critical incident response, I know what happens when people push feelings away, when people ignore fear. Oh, I don't want the boss to know I don't actually know the answer. I don't know how to do this. So then I go do the thing and something bad happens. So the ego plays a big role. Our fear plays a big role. Not sure if we're still recording. My system keeps beeping at me and it told me it had to disconnect me. So I hope that some of this podcast got recorded. I was just speaking about some of the things I wanted to cover in the podcast, which is stories of courage and agency. And I was sharing a bit about my own personal experience with agency and not wanting fear to drive the bus. And so I've put myself in scary arenas in the past to not be a victim of my fear. This episode 1 was to share a bit about my background, how I came to this place to be starting the Agentic Self podcast, to elevate voices of courage, to inspire people to have an awareness of their inner agency. In a world that is selling apathy and disconnection, I suggest we lean into our agency, connect to ourselves, and then we'll be able to connect with others with more compassion, more love, and move away from judgment and fear and violence. If we are seeking less violence in the world, we can't be hypocrites. We have to have less violence within ourselves if we expect to see less violence in the world around us. Essentially, this podcast is about the science of agency, the spirit within us, and really the psychology of transformation. Because We all have the ability to identify our own architecture, to be curious about the code we're operating from, the values we're operating from, and get curious about our intention. If you're interested in understanding more about you, if you're looking to be more in your own agency, if you're curious about the ways that you can calibrate your own life, your own mind, body, spirit, in order to achieve those outcomes that you seek and desire. If you're interested in becoming more present in your own body and less disconnected, less scrolling, checking out, less avoiding. If you want to be inspired by other people's ability to rise after a fall. The Agentic Self podcast is not a optimization podcast. This isn't a how to fix yourself because you're not broken. We are just getting curious. We are just learning about ourselves. We're focused on how can we learn to integrate mind, body, spirit, and show up in a way that is authentically ourselves so that we're not in performance. We're not in disconnection. We're not in our ego. We're not in a dysregulated state where we're reacting. We're in a state of connection, a state of wholeness, and a state of responding with our wise mind, with our compassion, our common humanity, and our curiosity about how can we show up with more love for ourselves, more reverence for this life? How can we leave things better? How can we create a legacy of love and connection versus the disconnection, dissociation, avoidance that is plaguing our people? We have never been a more disconnected cohort of the human species than we are now. And make no mistake about it, we created this. It's not them out there. The answers are not in them out there. We all are at a crossroads. The threshold is before us. What are we choosing? Connection or disconnection? Are you ready to hold the mirror? Are you ready to clear the smoke to take your power back and have agency in your life? If you are curious about any of this podcast might be for you. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.